Hi everyone, I'm going to share everything about my master's thesis research and what I found, and it is all about the effects that multiple intelligences has on early learners' engagement. So I want to start with my inspiration for this study, how I picked the topic that I did. So what I wanted to do was make sure that I picked something that would be really meaningful. And so I chatted with some teachers that I know, teachers that I work with, and asked them what problems they see in their day-to-day teaching. And a very common problem was keeping students engaged. So what I did from there is I looked at some different strategies and I ended up picking the idea of including multiple intelligences as a strategy for engagement. And I wanted to research that to see if it could be a solution to this problem. So from there, the context of this study was my own classroom. We are in rural New York, and it's a general education kindergarten classroom. So that is where the study took place. And for my hypothesis, I really did feel like if we implemented multiple intelligences, I really thought that we would see a decrease in these off-task behaviors, which in turn would increase student engagement. So getting into the methodology, this was a mixed method study. And just to get an idea of what this looked like, my students are used to learning in centers style instruction. And so that's what I wanted to keep consistent so that it wasn't super different than what we're used to. And what we did is I taught a direct instruction style lesson, and then I taught lessons that included a few of the multiple intelligences. So one that is tied to math, one that is tied to art, one that is tied to movement, and one that is tied to music. And so my plan was really to compare direct instruction to these lessons that included the multiple intelligences. And then for data collection, what I did is I actually videoed the lessons so that I could go back, watch as many times as I needed, and I tallied up off-task behaviors. I figured this would be a good way to really gauge their engagement. And then on top of that, I took notes the whole time the lesson was happening, what I observed, things that maybe I wouldn't notice later in the film. So this research really gave me a lot of really great information. So I've included the bar graph from all of the data from my research and data collection. So across the bottom, you can see that each number is really an individual student, and then each different color goes along with one of the different lessons. So you can see how many off-task behaviors students were showing, and the hope was that if it was a multiple intelligences lesson, that their off-task behaviors would be decreased. Now, what I did notice is overall, when you look at all of the data, it did show that students did have less off-task behaviors during those lessons with multiple intelligences. Now, of course, that was not what happened for every single student, and there are a couple of reasons why. So some students might have had more off-task behaviors in one of the multiple intelligence lessons for a few different reasons. One of them might be that that student is not strong in that intelligence. A lot of the research within my thesis is about how we have different strengths in different areas of these intelligences. So that could be one reason that a student had more off-task behaviors, is that is not an area that they're strong in. Another reason is that these lessons were pretty different for us, and in a kindergarten setting, that can cause a lot of off-task behaviors. So for example, the art lesson had a lot of art supplies that we're not used to using, which caused students to be off task. They were very engaged in the lesson and they really enjoyed it, but it did show more off-task behaviors because they were playing with the materials just because they weren't used to it and they were excited about it. But that's why I took observational notes as well, because just because they showed more off-task behaviors, these observational notes really show that they were enjoying the lesson and that they were engaged. So, of course, my study had some limitations. The first was that I had actually planned to include interviews of students in my data, but unfortunately, interviewing kindergarten students wasn't really going to give me the information I had hoped for. I had planned for questions including what did you like about this lesson? Were there things that you didn't like about this lesson? And a lot of the answers I was getting included, I liked the lesson, or there was nothing that I didn't like. And there's just not enough that these kindergarteners are able to tell me to really use as good data. So that wasn't possible. And then along with that for limitations, it was a very small sample size. I only had 14 students for my class to participate with. So very small sample size. And it was also a pretty short time frame. Only one lesson for direct instruction, and then only one lesson for each of those intelligences that I included. So for future research, what I would like to see is one, a larger sample size, way more kids than just 14 in one single classroom. And what I did like about my study is looking at the research around multiple intelligences, there is not a lot of information for this primary setting. So I would say a larger sample size, but it also would be nice to see a few more grade levels involved besides just kindergarten, as long as it's at the primary setting. And then I think a longer time frame would give some really great data. As I mentioned, things like the art lesson, when we only did that lesson one time, they were very distracted by the new material and supplies. And I think if you had a longer time and could teach lessons that use those materials more than once, you might get some different data. So I would love to see that. As far as implications go, really, I found good data to back this up. So I think it would be really great if teachers learned more about multiple intelligences theory, what it means, how they can include it. Really, it's very easy to implement. A lot of teachers are already using some of these ideas, and if they learned more about it, they really could make some good plans to include them. And I think teachers would see a big change in student engagement. So I would love to see that in the future. So I know that was a lot of information in a short amount of time, really quick. So I did make a one-page little graphic, and it kind of has just the bits and pieces to remind you of everything that was included in this study. So of course the title, it includes my reasons for research, what my research questions were. It has my context, the findings that I had, implications, and I did include the graph on there because that graph really shows you a lot of what this study was all about. Lastly, I've included all of my references from all of my research, and I did also include my email. If there is anyone that would be interested in reading my full thesis, you can send me an email and I can provide that to you. I think it has a lot of really good information if you're wanting to learn more about multiple intelligences theory, and also a short presentation just doesn't get into everything that was included in this study. So if you were interested in reading the whole thing, send me an email and I can give that to you or answer any other questions. But other than that, thank you for watching.